Hello, everyone. I'm Walter Mead, and I'd like to welcome you to this conversation on the future of the middle class. Today, we're going to be talking with Mickey Kaus. Mickey is one of the most original and insightful analysts of contemporary affairs. He's anticipated some of the most consequential trends in American society. Mickey has written for Slate.com, The New Republic, Harper's, The Washington Monthly, Daily Caller, and other publications. In 2010, he was a candidate, unsuccessfully, I can probably point out, for the US Senate in the Democratic primary, joining a long list of intellectuals who enter politics and then leave soon thereafter. Mickey founded his blog Kaus Files at the start of the internet age, and in his book, The End of Equality, dissected many of the economic trends that have affected the middle class over the past several decades. Mickey's unorthodox positions on topics ranging from welfare reform to immigration defy conventional wisdom and have captured many of the frustrations experienced in outside the Beltway life. This conversation is the second in a series entitled The Future of the Middle Class that I'm hosting through Hudson Institute's Center for the Future of Liberal Society. Hudson is primarily known as a foreign policy think tank, but we find increasingly that foreign policy and domestic policy can't really be separated, that when one thinks about statecraft, you have to think about how does your society work for people at home, and because if it's not working for people at home, you may well not be able to do some of the things you think you need to do internationally. In this series, I'm inviting experts and policy professionals to Hudson to talk about the challenges facing the American middle class, the opportunities available for addressing those challenges, and how to make the future brighter and better for the United States and its people. So, Mickey, I hear you have some thoughts on this.
I do. I want to basically go through like 5 parts of my talk. First is I want to raise some issues about why do we really care about creating a middle class. I may have a quirky position on that. Second, the dilemma that you have outlined, which is what you call liberalism 4.0, which is a disastrous response of current liberals to the dilemma of the absence of middle-class jobs. Go through a bunch of other proposed solutions, including some wacky ones. Talk about why I think the middle class is ticked off, which has to do with the collapse of meritocracy. And for the 5th one is my own slightly woolly suggestion for how to proceed. On why do we care about the middle class? My take is I was driving down Highway 5 in California, which I don't know if you know Highway 5. It's the most boring road in the world. And so to amuse myself, I was asking myself, why do we care about income inequality? Everybody was talking about income inequality, and it was a surprisingly hard question to answer. And I came up with, suddenly it hit me, we care about income inequality because inequality erodes our mutual respect as equals. So it's hard to look the other in the eye as an equal if there's vast differences of income, or there has to be some basis for that equality. So I wrote a book saying what we care about is that looking in the eye, social equality, not so much income equality. So that leads to me, if all you care about is social equality, you might be happy with a society without a middle class, with just a bunch of people, let's say, making $40,000 a year, and 90% of the population is sort of at a very low level, but they're all, they all have enough so that they can look each other in the eye as equals. And there's a bunch of really rich people at the top, but the culture would be set by the 90% at the bottom. And so why do we need anybody in between? Why do we need people making $100,000, $80,000, $120,000 a year? The the median family income right now being around 65, I think. So, and I think that the main, it's good if they're more prosperous people. It is, as you say, a bulwark against political extremism. If you have two classes, a working class and a rich class, you have the class structure of the latifundia in Spain before the anarchists took over, and the anarchists realized, hey, if we just kill the boss man, we can run the farm ourselves. And so all of Spain turned anarchists overnight when they realized that all they had to do was kill the owner. So we don't want that. That's probably a bad situation. But it's also it solves a problem I hope we get into later, which is the servant problem. People who, I don't think you can have a society of equals where people perform menial personal tasks for rich people. So a society of butlers and rich people, hard to be an equal society. The middle class sort of puts a stop to all that because they're not rich enough to have butlers and they don't want to be butlers. So it sort of diffuses the stark class difference that would otherwise be a problem. So what's the second part? What's the dilemma we face today? The dilemma, I admit, when I wrote my book, I just assumed there was going to be a vibrant middle class. It was the 90s. More people were going up from the middle class than down, but there was a huge prosperous middle. Things looked up. The problem wasn't that anybody was getting poor. The problem was that the rich were getting so damn rich, inequality was increasing anyway. That is now no longer the case. We're faced with a problem where the economy we have isn't serving up $80,000, $60,000 a year jobs to unskilled American auto workers anymore, the way it was in what you call the blue model of the 50s and 60s, when we had oligopolistic auto companies and unions, and everybody who worked for them made a middle class wage. What was the reaction of Democrats to this dilemma? Well, as you point out, the first phase was relatively optimistic. We can all get training. Training is going to solve all our problems. Bill Clinton said training was going to build back the middle class. If skills pay more, as they seem to do, and I have what I called the most important chart. I don't know if you can see it, but it's a chart from about the late 70s to 2005, and it shows advanced degree people going up and people in high school sort of stagnant, and people with less than high school going down. And this is an ugly chart. It's since stabilized, but these were bad years. Hard to have an equal society when the rich are going up and the poor are actually getting poorer. The unskilled are actually getting poorer. But if the theory was if everybody got training, everybody would move up. We should also move to places where the jobs are. Remember the great neoliberal slogan, help people, not places. So don't worry about Appalachia. Worry about the people in Appalachia when they move to places where the jobs are. A couple problems with that. Training works very slowly. It also, it doesn't stop the meritocratic sorting process that puts smart people on top and people who are not so smart at the bottom. It is the meritocratic sorting process. So it accelerates that process. If everybody gets trained, we'll quickly sort out to the people who are trainable who go up and the people who are untrainable who go down. That's not a very good situation. There's also what I like to call the Hollywood effect, which is the more skills are important, the more differences in the stars and the people who are not so good with those skills becomes important. So if you put 25 actors on Hollywood Boulevard and come back 20 years later, you won't see an equal distribution of income. You'll see some superstars and you'll see some people who are waiting on tables. If you put in the 50s, if you put auto workers or welders and came back 20 years later, you'd come back, actually, it'd be pretty equal. The difference between a good welder and a bad welder isn't as great as the difference between a good actor and a bad actor. So the problem is, as we move into skills, we create inequality. And also, people didn't move. Whether we advocated it or not, people stayed in Appalachia. The best, and I always wondered why that was. And then I heard a song by an artist named Jason Isbell, who's very popular, called Cumberland Gap, about exactly this problem. And he says, I thought about moving away, but what would my mama say? I'm the only thing she has. So that didn't seem like a good reason until my own mother got sick. And then it seemed like a very good reason to stick around. So I think now the liberals have given up. That's, as you point out, there's sort of a second phase of 4.0 liberalism where they basically say, yeah, the information economy is going to destroy all the middle class jobs, but we can compensate through an elaborate series of government subsidies. You could almost see this in the Obama administration when you said, but we're bringing in all these immigrants, so they're going to bid down wages of the working class, and the working class is already suffering, and they would say, oh, but we're going to give them an expanded EITC and Obamacare. And so it's, and the unstated assumption was those people are hopeless anyway. They're never going to make it into the middle class. For the rest of America, their lives are going to be attached to the welfare state. The working class is going to go on the dole. If that doesn't appeal to you, then there's some other proposals. Some of them wacky, some of them not wacky. The least wacky is your proposal, which is damn straight they're going to be middle class jobs. We just don't know what they are yet. I may be relying on things you've written that were many years ago, so you may have changed your mind. But services like personal services like wedding planners and nutritionists and all the crazy things that my affluent friends on the west side of LA do might make it into the middle class and become the basis for a middle class lifestyle. Personal trainers, another obvious one. And there's also a columnist named Noah Smith who writes for Bloomberg, who pointed out that there's some big sectors of the economy, education and healthcare, where we're not really happy with machines taking over the jobs. We really want a human being to deliver them. Unfortunately, that's only 16% of the labor force now. My problem with this solution, and it's not a devastating objection, is, Oscar Wilde said the problem with socialism was there's too many meetings. I think the problem with this economy is there are too many interactions with personal servants there's a huge transaction cost with having another strange person coming into your house. You have to deal with them. And the classic one that you proposed was an ombudsman. You have a problem getting your Social Security check or dealing with the gas company. This person will take it over and deal with it. And the problem is, but then you have to deal with the ombudsman. So you need an ombudsman to deal with the ombudsman.
I thought you said I wasn't creating enough jobs with these proposals.
Yeah, well, even more jobs. It's even more effective. So it might work. It might not. It's possible. I've seen enough science fiction movies to know it's possible that at some point the machines might just take over and there's no work for the humans to do. That's a standard staple science fiction theme, and it might happen. I mean, it's never happened before when there's been technological advances, but it could happen this time. Other wackier ideas are, there's a new book out by Freddie DeBoer, which is right here, called The Cult of Smart. And he says, look, some people are just untrainable. They're going to be stuck on the bottom. We should just pay them anyway. He sort of advocates he's a very far left, sort of a communist scheme to each according to his needs, from each according to his abilities. And the problem with that is, how do you get the people with the ability to put out if you don't have the incentive of money? There's the David Goodhart solution. He also has a new book about the meritocracy, where he says we have to broaden the skills recognized by the meritocracy. Instead of cognitive skills, ability to do well on standardized tests, also do the heart and the hand, manual skills, dexterity, crafts, plus ability to show compassion, be compassionate in caring situations. That seems like an obvious good thing. The question is it enough to provide enough jobs? And does it eliminate one of the key problems, which nobody wants to talk about, which is a lot of these skills are inherited. So if all your skills are academic based on IQ, well, IQ is partly inherited. So people are going to marry other smart people and have smart kids, and we're going to get a caste system. I noticed Chris Hayes in his book said, the problem with our meritocracy is there's no mobility anymore. Well, that's exactly what you would expect from a meritocracy. If IQ is inherited, you would expect the smart people to stay at the top and the not so smart people to stay at the bottom, and there wouldn't be the old movement between the different levels that there used to be. And I'm not sure that broadening the array of skills that's rewarded, which is sort of done now, will eliminate all that. For example, looks is one of the skills that people may pay to go to a spa that has a very attractive receptionist, okay? Those looks are a valuable thing, but they're probably passed down genetically. There's what I call the Kafka solution, which is, Kafka had a day job. He was worked for an insurance company. Apparently he was a good insurance worker, but that wasn't what he cared about. That just paid the rent. He did his work in the evening, and what he really cared about was writing. Similarly, we can have a society of people in day jobs, just sort of enough to pay the rent, but what they really care about are their artisanal activities. They're in all country bands, they're painting, they're writing. A lot of bad novels will be produced, a lot of good novels, but there's that sort of model of how to live, which I think you can see sort of emerging in Brooklyn and Austin, Texas. People, they live for their bands. They don't live for their work. There's the Yang solution, which is exactly the same, except it's based not on a day job, but on a guaranteed income, as advocated by Andrew Yang in the campaign. And the problem with that is it's basically, as Ronald Reagan said, a super dole. It's welfare on steroids. If you had a problem with an underclass developing on welfare, before welfare reform, and even now after welfare reform, well, this is, you give people guaranteed money. Some people will do really well on it. Some people will be lazy and resort to antisocial behavior. And I think I'm in the latter camp. Okay. Judging from my behavior after I inherited some money, I haven't been wildly productive. Okay. My solution was we tolerate income inequality and a lot of income inequality, but we build a large public sphere where we're treated as equals. The classic institution of the public sphere was the draft in World War II. Basically, rich people didn't get out of the draft. We had John F. Kennedy, who was in a boat with a bunch of people who were working class people, not rich at all. It was a huge class mixer, and people still maintained friendships long after the war of people who, were much poorer than they were or much richer than they were. That was a great thing. It's gone away. It's not coming back. I was hoping that the healthcare system would substitute for the draft. I still have hopes that if we're all in the same national healthcare system, we're all in the same waiting rooms, we're all fighting death, that might be a way to achieve equality, even though incomes were wildly unequal. Unfortunately, with Obama, we went in the opposite direction, and we have a multi-stratified system where rich people have private plans, and there's Medicare, then there's Medicaid, and everybody's in a different system. If I'm being completely honest, none of these really seem like a huge winner to me, including my own plan. And my own plan is just sort of a hope that we can have a public sphere and we can somehow mix classes in neighborhoods, and that'll be enough to compensate for the decline of the middle class. I don't think I don't have a lot of faith in that. Why is the middle class, even the middle class that exists, even the successful meritocrats, ticked off? And why did we get Donald Trump in a time of rising prosperity? The economy been growing for 8 years, okay? And all of a sudden, why are people still angry? I think there are 4 reasons. First, the meritocratic, it's a rat race. People didn't like being worked as hard as the meritocracy was working them. Second, the glamour and sense of purpose in the 90s of we were building this great Silicon Valley economy where we're going to have computers lead us into a glorious future sort of evaporated, and we're now building an economy that everybody hates, where everybody's on social media being nasty to each other. The third is you could sort of see where it was going. The advancement had a nasty meritocratic cast. You could see that the smart people were getting richer and their children were, the stuff Chris Hayes talks about, were staying in the same class, and you weren't going to mix with them, and the people at the bottom weren't as smart, and that was just an ugly future. Nobody really likes that future. The novel that captures that future for me is a novel by Kurt Vonnegut called Play Your Piano. I don't know if you've read it. It involves a third of the society as managers, and the 2/3 are sort of in a WPA make work program called the Reeks and the Wrecks. Okay, because they're all drunk all the time, basically. And the fourth is that the meritocracy is collapsing. Look around. I mean, you can buy a place at Harvard. Jared Kushner bought a place at Harvard. When I went to college, that was unthinkable that a rich person would just get in because they gave Harvard $2 million or $10 million.
They didn't get in because they gave Harvard money. They got in because their father went to Harvard. It's a slightly different.
Right. Well, that's always been true. And bizarrely, did you know that Obama was a legacy? Because his father went to Harvard. He had a leg up getting into Harvard too. So it applied across races and classes. But yes, they're legacies. They're always legacies, alumni getting in. But now they're rich people who aren't necessarily alumni who can buy their way in. Maybe not to Harvard. Maybe you have to have both. But
no, I think you can probably. I think with enough money, even Harvard might be willing to look the other way.
The number I was told was $10 million, which seems about right to me. But Jared Kushner got in cheap for $2.5 million, I think. Other aspects of meritocracy are collapsing. The SATs are on their way out. This year, you have to write a personal essay. That's how you get in, a compelling personal story. Well, that's not the old Michael Young meritocracy of the 50s. That's something new. And at the bottom, we have race preferences. So at the top, you have the rich people buying their way in. At the bottom, you have race preferences. It leaves a narrow band in the middle for the actual meritocrats who are getting squeezed. So those are basically the 4 reasons why I think the middle class is pissed off. I'm skipping over a part where I talk about how overworked lawyers are and doctors.
Tragic.
My generation went to college and we all became lawyers and doctors, okay? Because we didn't want to be going to business because pigs were in business, okay? We were socialists and business was for pigs. And when I went to my reunion a few years ago, they took a poll, and these were very good pollsters, an in-depth poll, and the conclusion was, lawyers and doctors get a life, you're not happy. We all went into these professions, the top meritocratic professions. We got good grades, we got into the good schools, and we hate our lives, okay? You wonder why the middle class is ticked off. The lawyers have to bill 2,400 hours a year now. That's a lot of billable hours. Doctors have to work on a computer where they answer to an insurance company and don't get to talk to their patients. Don't even look at their patients sometimes. So they're not happy either. And the dream, we talked about the dream of Silicon Valley is curdled. People that used to be building companies, there's a guy named Julius Krein wrote a very good article about this. They're now, they say, I used to be building a company. Now I'm hoping to come up with a feature on an app that Google will buy. So it's just that the grand ambitions for what's going to happen in Silicon Valley and with investment have curdled. So what's just in conclusion, what my answer is, first, I'm not unhappy that the meritocracy is collapsing. If you care about social equality, the meritocracy was a disaster because it's very hard to maintain equality when everything is fair. The smart people go to the top. The people on the bottom can say, I'm really a loser because I had equal opportunity. I had a fair chance to get ahead. The meritocracy is fair and I'm still at the bottom. What does that make me? So the more unfair it is, oddly, the less bad the people feel at the bottom because it's not fair. If they didn't get a fair shake, so what? It's just the economy. So there's that virtue. And the second thing is, as long as we're moderating the quest for efficiency and productivity, which the meritocracy was supposed to further in the name of social goods, maybe we can further it in the name of other equally admirable social goods. The classic example is if your auto plant closes down, okay, and wants to go to China. The government could do something about it. We can protect the auto plant. That's what France does. I don't think in a fair global economy there would be too many French cars left around to drive. If you've ever owned a French car, they're just not as good as Japanese cars. But they protect it because they know they have to have it for their workforce. Well, we can do the same thing. We'll have slightly lousier cars, but we'll have jobs for unskilled people, middle-class jobs, good jobs. There would be a limiting principle of that. We wouldn't want to protect everything all the time, but we want to protect enough jobs to give enough middle-class jobs for enough of our people to enable the society we want. And it's not a society of player piano where the people, large numbers of people on the bottom just don't have any jobs. We want enough jobs, but it's not an unlimited number of jobs. We wouldn't necessarily have to protect every auto plant in every industry. The problem with this, and the problem with that sort of solution is that we'd be a slightly poorer country with lower GDP. We'd be less able to go toe-to-toe with China. If what you care about is going toe-to-toe with China, that's a problem. We'd be less able to mount a huge space exploration program because it takes a lot of money and riches to do that. So it's not crazy that you would say, no, we don't want to protect slightly inefficient industries. We want mass immigration. We want global trade. That's what will make us the richest country. Matt Iglesias has a book saying we can stand toe-to-toe with China if we have 1 billion Americans. Well, we only have 300,000 now. That's a pretty big increase. But if you really want to, if all you cared about was going toe-to-toe with China, sure, 1 billion people, great. We just shouldn't think we're going to enjoy the ride. Anyway, that's my wrap.
No, this is great. And so many rich subjects to sort of open up here. But I think one that interests me is that classically, when you hear people talking about the middle class in America, or the precursor of the modern middle class, which is the family farmer, the family-owned farm, going back into the 19th and 18th century, the idea was that this wasn't just about esteem and good feeling and social harmony, but it was that a democracy needs for the bulk of the people to do stuff that trains them to be smart voters. So the idea would be a farmer, well, you're an entrepreneur, you buy stuff and you sell stuff. Also, you understand trade-offs, like you want services, but on the other hand, you have to pay taxes on your farm. So you're always thinking, do I want a music program in the school? Yes, I do, but then do I want my tax rate to go up? No, I don't. I have to decide, I have to choose. And so the idea was that the electorate was composed of people whose life experiences enable them to participate intelligently in politics. And in many ways, I think that the 2.0 version of the American middle class, of the home in the suburbs, supported by a job, had a lot of that same thing in it. You're no longer self-employed on the farm. You might be working on a factory or in a company, but you're a property owner and you're sort of dealing with these trade-offs. And what was interesting to me just listening to you talk is that side of the middle class doesn't seem to be sort of play a large role in your analysis. And I just wondered if I'm missing something.
No, it's a point I hadn't thought of, that there is, in addition to social equality, you actually want virtues.
Yes.
And I hadn't thought about that. My book just focuses, and this is a limitation on it, it just focuses on equality. It doesn't focus even on community. We could be a nation of monads, all isolated, but if we looked at each other as equals, it would satisfy my criteria. Adding in your thing, which is very important, complicates it, because I don't think Democrats, at least, are producing that kind of person anymore, or even want to produce that kind of person anymore. They're producing consumers of government aid.
Right.
And they're
careful. You're in Mitt Romney territory here.
Oh yeah. Well, nobody's recording this or anything, so it's okay. I can just
going to share it with a few friends. Don't worry.
Right.
And
there are no waiters with cameras here. Yeah. But I guess it does dovetail with what Mitt Romney said, which is, we've long ago abandoned the idea that we have any characterological qualifications for voters, although we can certainly care about whether we're producing them. And I think Democrats have at least at the second half of the liberalism 4.0 have sort of abandoned that. They wouldn't say that, but they I'm a Marxist at heart. I think character comes from what you do to earn a living and the means of production. And if the means of production are you get a welfare check or an Andrew Yang UBI check, you're not going to become this sturdy yeoman who can make all these decisions that we expect voters to make, or expected voters to make. That's a very good point.
Yeah, and right, and it seems to me that this seems to me to be the decisive argument for me about things like UBI and so on, because if you have higher and higher percentage of the voters who really are living in a world where your vote is a means of production, you vote for the right candidate, they up the UBI or whatever it is, then democracy is not gonna work very well, and the country will not flourish, I think, with the kind of leaders that you get that way.
But it would fit with a society of people in day jobs who are Kafka at night.
I think that's part of the solution. I don't think it is. I don't think any of these things, including my own, are the solution. But I do think, in a sense, if we're going to talk Marx here at the Hudson Institute, why not? But the idea that one way to describe progress is it's freeing up humanity from the sphere of necessity to allow you to enter the sphere of freedom. that your day job, the business of achieving what you need to just keep yourself fed and housed goes down, which releases more energy for other pursuits.
Right.
Nothing wrong with that I can see.
Right. I just don't think, maybe I'm a holdout because all my friends loved Andrew Yang. I don't think you can relax the requirement that everybody has to go to work to support themselves, because that is, not only is that a centering thing for human characters, but it's the basis for why we treat each other as equals. In other words, Bill Clinton says, you go to work every day, work should pay. That's the qualification to be an equal in our society. You go to work to support yourself. And even if it's just a day job that pays the rent and not what you care about, I think it's important.
Yeah, I tend to agree there. I think a lot of it, I would say my argument about the new economy will generate more jobs is kind of a long-term one, which may be, so that I'm not saying, okay, this is a fix for what we have today. But if you'd had people in the 19th century sitting around talking about the family farm is going to disappear because these new enhanced technologies, the family farmer won't be able to make a living anymore, and over half, 2/3 of the American people are family farmers, where will the jobs go? What will they do? All right. And you might have had people who said, okay, well, they're going to be horseless carriages, and so there'll be jobs making horseless carriages. And really visionary people might have said, and there'll be flying machines, and people will have jobs making the flying machines. But I don't think anybody would have said, and in those horseless carriages, some people are going to want to hang fuzzy dice from the mirrors. And so there's going to be a factory somewhere making fuzzy dice. But also, people will want to take their pets along in the flying machines. And so somebody's going to make a living writing letters saying that your alpaca is an emotional support alpaca, and you should be able to take that with you in the flying machine. So I think in some ways, when we project far enough ahead, it's kind of, the possibilities are probably much larger than we can think about. And what Thomas Carlyle said, man is such a wanting animal that people will want things and other people will be able to make some money by meeting those wants.
Right. And I agree. And I certainly hope that is what happens. The obvious argument against it is we've never had technology that completely substituted for human physical effort.
Right. Yeah.
And now we have that.
But I think about, say, this year, maybe we're not thinking about travel as much as we used to, except in a very wistful kind of way. But, when the internet first came out, I remember everybody talking about, oh, this is fantastic. We're going to disintermediate all the travel agents. And now, now I can look up myself and find out, what the right ticket would be and the right hotel and so on. I can get the best prices myself. Why do I need to pay somebody a fee? Now I think many people would say, please let me pay somebody a fee. Because the internet, in a sense, the internet becomes so large and the amount of information out there is so large that it breeds a new specialization of labor.
Right. It sort of dovetails. There's no real boundary between those sorts of jobs and jobs that people might love that they consider their artisanal job, as like being in an alt country band. I have a friend who does one of those jobs. She has a business. She makes the most competitive industry in America, making masks. Okay. And she says she's never been happier in her life. And I realized starting a small business is like growing a plant. It makes you happy.
Yeah.
Makes humans happy. So people doing these service jobs might not be wildly rich, but they might be actually making enough money and be quite happy in a way that maybe they weren't in either the meritocracy or the Industrial Revolution. So that's the optimistic side of it.
Yeah,
I guess the models sort of merge.
Well, it fascinates me how the left has flipped on factory jobs, because for 100 years, tailorization and the automation of work was the soul-killing, crushing alienation of labor. It was the destruction of the spirit of the proletariat. And even you read Solzhenitsyn, it's like, materialist labor wears them down, and so they drink and watch porn at night because they need an escape. Their lives are so wretched. Now suddenly, the factory job, there's a life. Actually, I can't think that freeing people up from repetitive labor is a step backward for the human race.
Yeah. I've made that flip too, and I guess why have I done it? I think you need jobs for unskilled people, and those were jobs for unskilled people, and they were good jobs. Second, it's dignified in a way that service work isn't. In other words, somebody comes to my house and takes care of some personal task that I ordinarily should have, and I boss them around, so water a little more over there, clean a little more over there, honey. That's undignified for them in a way that making a car that you sell to some remote person, far away in a dignified arm's length transaction is not undignified. It's not servile. So,
although it does seem to me that one difference there is when those car workers were making the car as well as anybody could make a car. This is GM 1955, cutting edge, right? The work was necessary. And that's actually part of what work needs to be work, honorable, dignified work. It's like when it's like, well, you have no skills. And so we're creating this little make work environment for you, which we don't actually need so much because of the cars you produce, but because, well, little darling, we think, we need to have a job for you and for people like you. That's not the same thing.
It isn't. I was thinking, I mean, do people working in protected French auto plants making Renaults, which would not survive in a global competition, do they feel that their work is unnecessary? Or do they feel they're working for a national champion auto company and their cars are good enough?
Now, this may shock you, but my personal interactions with French Renault factory workers are not as great as maybe in a perfect world they would be. But the impression I get is that for a lot of folks, I mean, this whole idea of work being an evidently fulfilling thing is part of what's left of our being a kind of Anglo-WASP society, or at least Northern European Protestant society where work is a vocation and a calling and blah, 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 Max Weber, the whole, thing. And that, for a lot of folks in other parts of Europe, work is the horrible thing that your feudal landlord makes you do. And your goal is to do as little of it as possible and receive as much as possible. And so it's a tax that you're forced to pay. And I think the French may already be at a place where much more of their sort of self-image and all is, what do you do outside of the office?
Right. The one point I want to make, though, is that the glory days of the 50s, the blue social model, was not an era of free market competition. It was the auto companies were oligopolies. As you point out, there were companies like AT&T, which forestalled progress. We didn't even have digital phones for years and years and years because AT&T wanted to keep the rotary dial phone. So that was all unnecessary. We could have been much more productive and had many fewer workers working in those places, but we artificially sort of maintained a middle class even in the 50s because we had these anti-competitive practices.
But I'm not sure that, I think at the time people thought of those anti-competitive practices as actually ways of organizing, there was a belief that this was a more efficient organization of the economy. A lot of it goes back to like John D. Rockefeller and Standard Oil, that You've got to organize industry to really get the productivity up there. And there was rising productivity, which did get distributed. The state got a chunk, management got a chunk, shareholders got a chunk, and workers got a chunk. I mean, part of it, and we probably don't have time to get into all of this, is that shifting away from the factory system has really broken. Well, if you think about why did ordinary people have a lot of power in the middle of the 20th century? It's that, well, if they went on strike in just a handful of factories or the coal industry or the railroad industry, they could bring the whole economy to its knees. Or on the other hand, if you were in a war and you needed a conscript army and the conscripts wouldn't fight, your state would collapse.
Right.
And so the institutions of society, the culture of the elite was oriented toward winning cooperation from these people. And where we are today, if the 7-Eleven workers went out on strike, you don't need a conscript army. There's a sense of an elite that feels that it no longer needs the working class or the former working class. That capitalism in the West has outlived the industrial proletariat.
It's a very good point, although the woke movement has shown that your employees still have some power. They can force you to do a lot of things you might not want to do.
But those are the upper middle class woke employees. That's those are the Google workers and, people like that, who in a sense, that's a badge of their elite status, that they can force their employers to do things.
Right. That's a good point. What about the confrontation with China point? Because I had an idea that might help with that problem.
Well, go right ahead and share it.
What if we hived off defense industries and maybe exploration of outer space and maybe biotech, dramatic health advancement, and said, these are meritocracies. We're going to go balls to the wall. Ruthless efficiency. If your firm doesn't make it, you'll be wiped out, and we'll have to reallocate resources somewhere else. But the rest of the economy, including ordinary day-to-day healthcare, it's going to be looser and more protected, and we really have this extra criteria is we have to get jobs for all our people.
I think your
we have a
problem there,
bifurcated economy.
I think your problem there is that going to be that the heart of the defense industry is basically the heart of the civilian industry too these days, which is IT and tech. That information processing, in a sense, state power is getting much more closely linked to the ability to collect and understand, analyze, deploy information. And a country like China, where all of the information about the whole population is available both to the government and to government-supported data firms and so on, is a very powerful weapon. And it's going to be, I think, harder to maintain a kind of a separation, between high productivity in some sectors of the economy and low productivity in others. It's not a complete, so to speak, Chinese wall, because I think, for example, the daycare industry can probably, move along without being too enormously automated for a while. But it does, you want, for one thing, if you do, God forbid, have to go over to a war footing, you don't want your tanks to be coming out of converted bad automobile plants.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking there would have to be separate plants that made better vehicles for the tanks. The Chinese AI, that seems mainly useful for subjugating their own people.
It's also, what you do is, in order to do that, you develop capacities and tools that you can then use for other purposes.
Right.
So that you have computers, you have software, you have sort of records of how things are done. you also can apply that, through various forms of theft and cyber surveillance and stuff to analyze what's happening in other populations.
Right.
I mean, I think we'll probably end up, our government, our IT industry, I'm actually more worried about them coming together. And how do we maintain civil liberties in an era of tighter cooperation between government and IT?
I also feel quite strongly that part of our current malaise is people don't know where we're going, or as I talked about, they don't like where we're going. So we really need some, we were fighting the Cold War. Okay. That was a cause you could believe in. Okay. Space is another possible cause. It never holds that much appeal to me, but a lot of people seem to think exploring space is a good larger purpose. To me, the good larger purpose is advances in health. Let's try to live to 300. Let's be like Peter Thiel and the Methuselah Project. I
realize we're not supposed to talk about it in these days, but Woody Allen said at one point, somebody asked him, what does he want to say on his tombstone? He said, "He's not here yet." He also said, "I don't want to achieve immortality through my work. I want to achieve immortality through not dying." So I see where you're coming from.
Well, it just seems to me, if I would feel much better about my whole life if I thought it was going toward a larger end like that.
I agree that vision is, it's one of those things that people actually need for their daily lives. You may not know that you need it, but if you don't have it, your life becomes, gradually hollows out, and a society that doesn't have it gradually hollows out in all kinds of dangerous ways.
Even in the current presidential race, if either candidate outlined that sort of vision, I think they would do themselves a world of good. But they don't. Neither one is doing that.
Doesn't seem to be where we are right now. Well, Mickey, I hope we'll continue this, and I'd love to come back to you at a later date in these conversations and follow up.
I'd love to. This has been very helpful to me, I know.
Well, me too. And thank you, and we'll see you again soon.
Okay, thanks, Walter.
All right, bye.
Yeah.